Hi, I'm Sean Dickson from the Soup Dragons, aka Hi-Fi Sean, and I would just like to say a huge congrats to Mike Hipple for his 100th episode, and here's to 100 more.
Hello, and welcome to another new episode of Live Through That. I'm your host, Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we'll dig a little deeper into the pivotal moments that shaped the lives of some of my favorite artists from the 80s and 90s. I can't believe this, but this is our 100th episode. Initially, this podcast was just going to be an 8-episode series to promote my book, but I've had so much fun doing this that I just kept on going, and expanding the whole thing outside the book. I'm so grateful for everyone I've spoken to, and I'm very glad that you've joined me for the journey. So many thanks. I wanted to make this episode a little more special, so I invited some of our favorite guests to come back on and share some shorter tales or talk about what's going on now. We've got a bunch of really great stories, and since this episode is going to be a little longer than usual, let's just get started. First off, we've got Sean Dickson joining us. He's the singer-songwriter for the Soup Dragons and a solo artist and DJ under the name Hi-Fi Sean. Sean started working with singer David McAlmont on their album Happy Endings and continued their collaboration with a set of records that were released in 2024 and 2025. The goal was to release one record, Daylight, on the first day of summer, and the second one, Twilight, on the first day of winter. They didn't realize the challenges that would come with that self-imposed deadline.
So when we made Happy Ending, which kind of came out of lockdown, but I wouldn't say that it was started before lockdown, but it became an obsession during lockdown to get it finished. With the Bollywood orchestra, etc. So when we came to making a second album, I had this concept of like, wouldn't it be really great if we always kind of seem to write two types of track. We seem to either write complete uplifting, euphoric tracks, or the opposite. So instead of trying to because Happy Ending is a kind of mixture of euphoric tracks and quite darker tracks. So I kind of thought I've always wanted to do like a double out, not a double album together, but a consecutive album, one based on the more kind of euphoric side, the other one. And then David said, well, why don't we do the albums in a kind of thematic way? Um, why don't we do songs that are uplifting and some songs that are a bit more down? So then we come up with the idea of doing one about summer and calling it Daylight and basing the whole theme of the album on sunshine and euphoria and everything you would expect from uplifting songs. That was Daylight, and that came out on the first day of summer. And then we decided we would do its sister album, Twilight, on the first day of winter. Now, this sounds great on paper. That you think, okay, yeah, we can get 12 songs together for Daylight and then 6 months later release another album called Twilight. What we didn't realise is how much pressure we put on ourselves. Daylight was kind of easy when we were writing Twilight at the same time. So we just carried on writing the way we always write. But it was the time schedule that became really kind of restricting, because there's things like, when there's other people involved, like PR people, and I mean, it's my label, but we all still had, to get it to radio, you had certain deadlines, you had certain things like, coming up to summer, a lot of people go on holiday and things, and there was all this nonsense and all these kind of rules and regulations about when you should have singles out before your album and all that nonsense. And then we also thought, in this day and age where everybody likes content, that they would be able to handle having 24 songs basically in a year, which hasn't been the case, because when it came to the end of the year this year, a lot of people didn't realise that that Twilight actually came out this year, because we couldn't put it out on the first day of winter because it was too close to Daylight. So the actual dates of the first day of summer and the first day of winter were too close to be able to get singles out. So we had to make this decision, which was horrible, to move it to we decided to release in winter, but on Valentine's Day, and predominantly make it because it's predominantly about nighttime. We made it more of a kind of like album for the lovers type tag, and so we gave ourselves like a kind of just about a 6 month period between the two. But then people thought that this year, when you when you come to the end of last year and people were like giving their favorite albums, Twilight totally disappeared, and there was so many journalists afterwards that just realized afterwards, oh God, shit, Twilight actually came out, and in 2025. Everybody thought it was the year before because of daylight weather, and no, sorry, yeah, 2025. They thought, they didn't realize it came out in February, whereas daylight was the year before. So it caused a lot of confusion, but I think in our catalogue in the future, it's such a wonderful thing to have. Is we are basically the first people that have ever released an album where one album's about daylight on the first day of summer and one day's album, that those consecutive albums are actually joint albums.
The Soup Dragons disbanded in 1995, but Sean got back together with his bandmates in 2023 to record a few new songs and do some shows.
The idea was we recorded two new songs. One with Fred Schneider from the B-52s. It was a double A-side 7-inch, and one I wrote called Love Is Love. Basically, I thought it was interesting to write a song now about me being a gay man, which was never part of the Soup Dragons, or it was. But but let's not go there. Yeah, so I thought it'd be interesting to write a song about the position of my love life now and present it to the guys, and they loved it. And then the other side, we did it as a collaboration with an organisation called, Emergency. What's it called? Planet Declares Emergency. Basically, they have a logo. The logo is no music on a dead planet. So that was the song, and Fred Schneider loved it as well, and he did his no music on a dead planet. There's only one person that could sing it the way Fred sang it. Yeah, so yeah, it's been really good. We've been doing festivals, and they guys live in Glasgow and I live in London, so it's a bit weird because we've came to the point now. It's like I kind of wrote all the songs back then, so I know them off by heart. So they rehearse, and I just turn up at shows and walk on stage and sing, which has been really bizarre because there was a festival, I think it was last year, and I got the train from London to Bristol, which is about an hour, and the train arrived, and I literally got there just before we went on, and I walked on stage, and they'd been rehearsing all week, and walked on stage, and great gig, sang all the songs, and then literally the train home was like half an hour after the gig, and then I got back on the train, and I was back in London, and I was a bit like, what just happened there? This is weird. So I've done a few festivals. I like to. Yeah, it's just for kind of financial sake as well. Not going up to Glasgow all the time to rehearse. I do go up sometimes, but we try and keep the costs down so we can actually make some money out of doing these gigs.
Sean says he'll never put that amount of time pressure on himself again. He's still working on new music as well as DJing, and the Soup Dragons are still out there as well doing the occasional show or festival. Now we've got Debora Iyall from the 80s new wave band Romeo Void. Their song Never Say Never has really stood the test of time and still sounds fresh when you hear them today. When we were talking about ideas for this episode, I asked her whether there were any shows or artists she'd seen that had inspired her.
First, content-wise, was Patti Smith. Because I was a poet, she was a poet. I got really engaged in her writing and the freedom of her lyrics and the songs and the expression and the artistry and the imagery and all of that. Pissing in a river, I was all about Patty. But when I went to see her, she basically kind of looked like a female Keith Richards, you know, tall and lanky and slim. She even wore a Keith Richards t-shirt when I saw her. And so I didn't directly identify like I could be on stage when I saw her, 'cause she was still, skinny, and all that. And I was like, well, I don't even think I thought about it. But I loved her, and I was very avid about the opening that was happening in music for a different kind of lyric and a different kind of performance and a more kind of um, back to the grit and honesty of the blues. Let's really talk about what's going on, and that kind of honesty that blues and country music had, and by the time we started Romeo Void, it was about, 1980, and country had turned into new country, and rock and roll had turned into corporate rock or cock rock, and wasn't that relatable to me. And I started going to the San Francisco Art Institute because I decided I really wasn't meant to just work a job at either a health center, where I'd been at the American Indian Health Center, or I'd also been a preschool assistant teacher at a preschool, American Indian Action Council preschool. So I was involved up in Humboldt County in a couple of different jobs, but I realized I want to be an artist. I can see myself. And so I applied for art school and got accepted. And sort of concurrently, I'd also seen Patti Smith for the first time. So it made me want to move out of the country, and go to a big city and go to school so I could go and be, at least an audience at this new thing that was happening. And a friend of mine who taught at the preschool, he was a teacher. He was from New York and got New Yorker, or no, New York Rocker. Yeah, New York Rocker. It was like it was on newsprint, but it was like a magazine with, tons of articles and everything. And he was asking me who I'd heard of, and we were reading all about Patti Smith. And then the very first time she came to Berkeley, him and I went to see her at Rather Ripped Records, and we were very excited and bought the little book that she'd put out, and bought a little stapled together like broadside of her and Tom Verlaine that they had put out, which I still have my little collector's items. I'm not really much of a collector, but I've managed to keep those things over the years. And so when I started going to the Art Institute after being inspired by Patti Smith, and I'm going to my first class the first day of school, I walk by a locker with the lyrics to We Are the One. And it was Penelope Avenger's locker. And she had already quit going to the San Francisco Art Institute. But I thought, wow, this is a good sign. I'm exactly where I should be. I'm walking by Penelope from the Avengers locker every day, So I felt very satisfied about my choices, and lucky I'd, been able to get myself into that situation. Anyway, I started going to see the Avengers. And I remember very clearly one night watching her, and she wasn't in any way, shape, or form trying to be like pretty or feminine or sound pretty or lilting, like so many of the folk singers, that I actually admired. Judy Collins and Joni Mitchell and all that. They had really pretty voices, and she wasn't trying to do any of that. And like Patti, she was just sweating and, I don't know if she's wearing jeans or not, but it seemed like she was just in regular, everyday, walking around on the street clothes. And she was magnetic to me. I couldn't take my eyes off of her. She had complete commitment in what she was doing and confidence, and she had something to say. And I was like, you know what? I have something to say. And so at that moment, all of a sudden, I thought I could make a band, and I hadn't really thought that thought until I saw Penelope Avenger. And so, Penelope, you're out there, you're wonderful, and I still admire you.
Romeo Void just released a live record for Record Store Day in April 2026. Apparently, it's sold out, but you can still listen to it on the streaming service of your choice. Another one of our favorite stories came from Tom Maxwell, singer and songwriter for the Squirrel Nut Zippers. Today, Tom tells us a very different story about nearly losing his son.
Honestly, it's this weird 1-2 punch that I experienced. Like, it didn't feel like a 1-2 punch looking back on it. It was consecutive practically, but that is to say, I quit the Squirrel Nut Zippers. I had that whole experience with Squirrel Nut Zippers in the late 90s. I quit in June of 99. My daughter Evelyn was born a year later in August of 2000. My son Eston was born in 2003. And when he was 3 or 2.5, God almighty. Yeah. Oh, man. He was diagnosed with ALL, acute lymphocytic leukemia, which was traumatizing. And he was diagnosed a week after his mom moved out. So, you know, I was very much fully on board the woe is me train. And that is what they call the good cancer. I would never have used this terminology about cancer, but turns out it is. When I was his age, it was 5% survivable. His odds were 95%. He beat it. It has to do with what's going on in the marrow and producing what are called leukocytes, which are malformed white blood cells, and they just proliferate, and it sort of like disables the body's ability to fight anything off. It does require chemotherapy. The other form of leukemia that requires bone marrow transplants is 50% survivable. And there were kids who died, just straight up. So then I was ushered into the world of the pediatric oncology ward. And that whole experience of we're going to destroy your kid's immune system by giving him chemo, but so the thing that actually kills the kids is not the cancer, it's staph infection or what, you know, that's the thing that'll kill him. So if he has a fever over 100.5, he's got to go to the ER. So there was a lot of that, lots of that, and going up to that enclosed space and being admitted into, once we got a room, the pediatric oncology ward. And I said it before and I'll say it again. It's an experience I would not wish on anyone, and nor would I trade it for the world. I met the most committed group of people there I've ever met. I think I will ever meet. The nurses and the doctors up there, extraordinary people, saved my son's life. The parents, the kids themselves. It was horrible. I mean, it's fucking awful. But like it just completely transformed me. The treatment itself was bad. You know, it was bad. And I was not emotionally equipped to handle it very well. I remember they would do this thing. They would do they would do a lot of stuff to him. But like one thing that they would do is they would take him into a room, they'd knock him out, and they would push chemo up his spinal fluid because the fucking cancer would hide out in his spinal column. I mean, that's how vile this stuff is. And of course, I hated that because I would have to leave. You know, my first reaction to his diagnosis was to just try to figure out a way to work a deal in which we could switch places, you know, like, because the parenting thing is like, you get in front of the bullet, the oncoming car. That wasn't going to happen. So then it was just like, I'm going to be there the whole time, asleep in the chair in the hospital, whatever. But when they're like, we're going to take him into this room. Now, these people, his doctor was the head of UNC's pediatric oncology program, who are as good as St. Jude's. This guy is just, it wasn't that he wasn't in the greatest possible hands. It's just that I didn't want to have to leave the room. So I would just fucking leave the room and they'd go in there and they'd knock him out and then they'd go like, bye. And I would go down on the sidewalk and just, you know, hot box cigarettes and pace up and down the sidewalk. until he came out, which he always did. And that treatment course lasted for 2.5 years, I think. He was diagnosed in October of 2006. He finished on Valentine's Day of 2010. And then 5 years before the all clear, which he got. Now, once all that was done, I remember talking to him about it. This was just sort of the point of it. I mean, the point of it is, one, that was an inflection point in my life where I learned how to be relentlessly loving and lovingly relentless. And I learned how to be a fierce advocate, because those people are busy. They got shit to do. And like, if you need attention in that environment, you need to go make it happen. That has helped me in my life, that skill set, for myself and for others. The other thing is that when I talked to him about it later, I found I was quite shocked that his experience was almost diametrically opposed to my own. My experience with my son's diagnosis and treatment was one of full catastrophe, perpetual trauma, anguish, gnashing of teeth, and rending of garments. Particularly the entire experience of him going to what we would call the white room, what he would call I think it was called the white room. I hated it. He loved it. And it was because he loved the drugs that they would give him. They'd give him this stuff to knock him out. It was the white medicine. They'd push this stuff into him to knock him out. And of course, that's when I would just start like weeping, basically, because I just couldn't let him go. That was the greatest thing for him. That was like a disposition for, or whatever the word is, like an indulgence for him. And so, he was so young. He had not really started preschool yet or nursery school, but was just getting into that routine when he was yanked out of it, and he was constantly being yanked out of whatever as the years progressed. Nursery school, kindergarten, first grade, constantly being pulled out. And so when he was returned in any meaningful way, he was functionally dropped into a race that had already started, and I saw him struggle with making friends or being accepted sort of by the other kids and all this other stuff. But what dawned on me, this is very long-winded, and I don't even think this is the most important part, but it dawned on me as a writer and communicator that functionally the trajectory of his experience could not be told from my own when I was a temporary rock star. I also loved the drugs. I smoked weed every day. That was pretty much the only drugs I took. But and that was really fun. I loved the dispensation of being lifted out of a normal routine. I didn't have to be a grown up in that sense. I got to get on a tour bus and sop up all that gravy. Now it's a complete fucking grind, and people think you're on permanent vacation, which is not the case at all. You're actually it's more like submarine duty, and you almost never see the surface. But like there was but the way that you're treated is that you are special. You're made to feel special, and it was odd to me and sort of informative that we had gone through the same thing basically. And that I remember when I quit the Zippers, friends of mine were basically like, whatever, welcome back, welcome back to reality or whatever it was, and I was like, not sure I want to be here at all, actually. And I don't really know how to do that. I've been doing this other thing since I was 20 or, younger, really. And now I'm in my mid-30s, and they're like, well, now you can just go and be normal. It's exactly the same way that I felt. Like I was like, oh, thank God, Eston's done with his treatment now. He can just go be a kid. And I don't know that is the point. The point is that was my access. That was my access point of understanding, that I'd actually been given insight preemptively into where he, on his perspective for this thing that was, in my mind, categorically different, but kind of maybe not really. I lived through that.
Tom's son is now a young adult, and he's, quote, as healthy as a horse. Tom's got a new podcast coming out later this year called The Night Parade, so be on the lookout for that. And one of our most popular guests we've ever had on the show is Luscious Jackson's Kate Schellenbach. So, of course, we had to invite her back to share another story.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Schellenbach, and I am the drummer for Luscious Jackson and also a founding member of Beastie Boys. Now, first of all, huge congratulations to Mike Hipple and Live Through That for hitting 100 episodes. Today, I'm going to share a story about the moment my teenage dream actually came true. So, my first ever favorite band was Blondie. I'm talking posters on my walls, Debbie Harry t-shirt, I joined the fan club, the whole deal. I was obsessed with their music and how they dressed, Debbie's voice. I loved the way they mixed together all these different musical genres. They did punk, new wave, like 60s girl groups, disco, reggae, rap. It was very New York. Their lyrics were sort of sexually ambiguous, too, and I used to fantasize that Debbie was singing Pretty Baby just to me. They're still one of my all-time favorites, and honestly, Parallel Lines remains a perfect album. Back then, as a young teenager, there was no internet, no social media, no YouTube. So if you wanted to know what was happening with your favorite bands, you'd had to go look at music magazines or fanzines. You'd hang out at the record stores. You'd listen to underground radio shows, and you'd hope for just even like a tidbit of news. I remember hearing on the radio that Blondie was shooting a new video for a song off of their album Eat to the Beat. The radio station was running one of those call-in contests where you were like caller number whatever, and you'd be picked to be in the audience for the shoot. Now, looking through their videos now, I'm pretty sure it must have been for their song Dreaming. So I stayed up way too late on a school night, calling and calling every time the DJ gave the prompt, and sadly, I wasn't picked. But between those failed phone calls, I had this vivid fantasy that I was actually in the audience that day. And just before the taping, their drummer Clem Burke breaks his arm or something like that. And suddenly someone shouts from the stage, "Is there anyone here tonight who can play the drums?" And since I was already a young budding drummer at the time, I'm waving my hands in the audience screaming, "Yes, me!" And I get picked to sit in for Clem. Now, Clem Burke is an unparalleled drummer, and he was a huge influence on my playing. Rest in peace, Clem. Now, fast forward nearly 20 years. It's the early days of Luscious Jackson, and we're starting to get some attention in radio play, especially around New York. We're playing a show at Nell's, this trendy downtown club, and guess who's in the audience dancing during our set? Debbie fucking Harry. Thank God I didn't know she was there until after the show, or I think I would have completely lost it. We'd been telling every interviewer how much Blondie influenced us, so finding out she was a fan blew us away. Whenever I was home in New York between tours, I'd often play drums for this monthly tribute show called Fraggle Rock. We'd pick a band and get a rotating group of local female musicians to cover their hits. I did nights for Prince, Hole, Heart, Foreigner, Pat Benatar, and of course, Blondie. The Blondie lineup featured my friends Theo and Gina, the singer and guitarist from the Lunatics. We had one quick rehearsal, threw on our best new wave gear, and hit the stage. Theo was basically embodying Debbie Harry that night. Well, guess who showed up to watch this tribute to their own band? Debbie Harry and Blondie guitarist Chris Stein. Turns out Theo had some friends who invited them to the show, never actually thinking they'd show up. So no pressure, right? Luckily, our show was great, and I met them briefly afterwards, but I was so shy I couldn't even put a sentence together. A few months later, my home phone rings. Now, this is before caller ID, so every incoming call was like a total mystery and a possible adventure. So I pick up the phone and I hear, "Hi, Kate, this is Debbie Harry."
This is Debbie Harry calling.
And I'm on the other end of the phone thinking, okay, this is a joke, right? But she keeps going on, and "I hope you don't mind me calling you." And I'm like, of course not. "We're doing a surprise show at Tramps on Friday, and Clem can't do it. Do you think you could fill in on drums? We know you know the songs." Yes. She told me we'd have one rehearsal and then the gig. This was literally my teenage fantasy coming true. Debbie told me the set list, and luckily I already knew the songs from playing the tribute show. Luscious Jackson was recording Electric Honey at the time, so I called the girls and I got a few days off to practice. Later that week, I'm in a cozy rehearsal space with Chris Stein counting me in and Debbie Harry singing and dancing right in front of me and the rest of the band. It was truly surreal. That Friday, we take the stage at Tramps. Joey Ramone had curated that night's lineup for the annual Intel Music Fest, and Blondie was the surprise headliner. Debbie introduces the band and says my name.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce my friends, Kate Schellenbach, Chris Stein, Debbie Harry.
I start the first song. Boom, 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 boom. and I launched into the tom-heavy frenzy of dreaming. Blondie hadn't played many shows in the 90s, so the crowd was going absolutely bonkers. I just tried to stay focused, breathe, and not play everything at double speed, and I tried not to have a panic attack, too. We played 6 classics: Dreaming, Ex-Offender, Rapture, Rip Her to Shreds, Hanging on the Telephone, and One Way or Another. Debbie was having a blast. She was riffing and joking with the audience the whole time. 30 minutes later, it was all over. All those years of hard work, the endless practices, the shitty gigs with gross dressing rooms, months away from home, living in crap hotel rooms, and lugging my drums up and down 7 flights of stairs, it was all worth it. After the show, I told Debbie, this is a dream come true for me. And she just looked at me and said, yeah, it's a dream come true for me too. I'm a big fan of your band. I didn't quite believe her then, but she did end up singing on our track Fantastic Fabulous, which is actually our tribute to Blondie and that whole New York City punk scene we were just a little too young to experience firsthand. Now I had to wrap my head around the fact that my teenage dream had actually come true, so where do I go from here? Well, just like Debbie sings, dreaming is free.
Next up, we've got the fabulous Tracy Bonham. She was on one of our earlier episodes, and I'm thrilled that she's back. Her debut record, The Burdens of Being Upright, was released 30 years ago this year and still resonates today. In fact, she's doing some things this year to promote that anniversary.
Yeah, the 30th anniversary of The Burdens of Being Upright. And what I'm doing is I'm re-recording in the studio, and I'm going to release something in the late fall. And so I'm also putting together shows. They're rock shows, and it's really fun. It's like so much fun to rock out again. And, eventually like a tour that'll hopefully go into 2027. So I'm very excited about that.
Didn't you release a re-recorded version back in 2017?
I did. I know. I was like, I hope you forgot. The third time, this will be much better than the second time. The second time, I love the fact that I got the other female artists on there featured. I love that. It was so girl power. But I listened to the album recently. And I was like, I did not like, I was a little checked out, honestly. This one I really, really care about. And it's really powerful for me. It's like a kind of a coming around to who I was and, really setting my life on track with a lot of healing from that time. Because it was all about trauma from being in an abusive relationship and being alone, and life was not fine. And all of the, just those years after leaving home and what preceded it. My childhood was a little bumpy. And so now I've really done a lot of inner work, which is really fun, actually, honestly. And I'm in such a better place.
Did you rewrite the lyrics to reflect this new place that you're in?
Yeah, the lyrics are the same. It's kind of like I'm meeting past Tracy, and it's kind of like I can apply the same lyrics to other situations in real time or in the span of 30 years, or just in an understanding of what I was going through at that time and why I said those things. A lot of this is rediscovery.
You've gone from some string-heavy arrangements to a more heavier rock sound. What direction is this re-recording going in?
So it first started out, I was just doing strings because my last album was so string heavy and I just loved it so much. And I was having such a blast with string arranging. And so then the idea came, well, I'm just going to do string quartet and vocals on the Burdens songs. And of course that was really fun. And I've been performing that live, and it's a really cool show. And I was developing a storytelling aspect. So I went into the studio thinking, well, it could be like almost like the live show. But then I had a day where I invited some musicians in, a drummer and a guitar player, and then it just turned into something even better. It was like strings. I had the strings come in first, but then they added to the strings, and now it's opening up to like, wow, a bigger lush sound with the strings as like a focus, but really like allowing these songs to breathe in the ways that they couldn't in the 90s, because everything was just like, I'm going to be this, and I'm, you know, looking down at my shoes, or I'm going to be whatever it was that I thought I had to be in that time. Now it's just like this maturity, there's air, there's the strings, and it's lush. I really am really excited about it. I guess I'm a little embarrassed that I'm doing it again. It's kind of like, geez, Tracy, don't you have any new material? So I feel like the little judgment voices raising their hands, like, what's wrong? Why can't you just make new material? And especially because I did it already. So I guess I have a little shame about it, but not enough to, like, I really am impassioned about what I'm doing with this.
Do you have some new material that you're working on as well?
Well, I have a lot of new stuff on deck. I guess I think what will happen is it'll come out soon after, because I kind of wanted it, I wanted to do this 30th for the fans and just kind of keep it boom, and tour on it and kind of make it a big deal. Like, this is what I'm doing. It's the 30th anniversary. The nostalgia aspect was something that I got really excited about, like, in the last year. I was like, I went to a Belly concert, and I was in the concert hall, at Sony Hall, and Belly was up on stage, and all the people were standing around, and I just felt like I was back in the 90s, like in Boston. And I was like, this is so cool. I want to do that. I want people to feel that, because the more I think about it, I'd been running away from the 90s for so long. Like, I'm doing new stuff. But when I think about it, that time, it was so special. It was before streaming. It was before cell phones. It was when people went to live music. It was when people went to record stores. It was when radio stations played your demo. Artists were encouraged, at least what I thought was that we were encouraged to be unique and quirky and not fitting into a box. Maybe some other people had that experience, but I always felt like I was allowed to be quirky and take left turns, and until like around 1998 things started to change, and then boom, the rest of the the history is there. Like, radio stations turned into major market, like, conglomerations and labels, only wanting hits. And so the nostalgia for that creativity and that time where there was a community is really powerful for me. So I want to do that too. I want to relive that, and I want fans to relive that, at least for now, and then we'll move on.
On the second re-recording of Burdens, you had a lot of other 90s females musicians, and you had said that creating that record was kind of a great way to reconnect with those artists. I've heard from other artists that it was hard forming those friendships in the 90s because the media and record companies were always pitting women against one another.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the fun. I think that became the fun part of making that album and then talking about it afterwards. So it's absolutely true. When I was first coming out, and I kind of had overnight success in a way. Even though I'd been a musician my entire life, I just kind of busted out of the scene in Boston, and there were a lot of other female bands and artists that had to work longer or didn't, and there was a lot of animosity and jealousy I felt in Boston. So I had that, but also the knowledge that the radio stations could only play like one or maybe two female artists when all the rest would be dudes. It really psychologically put us against each other. I think also youth and immaturity, for me at least, I felt in competition with women in general because I was insecure, and I guess I based my self-worth way too much on what men thought of me. And so that would immediately put me kind of in competition. And I wouldn't be overt about it. It wasn't that, it was more like up here. And so I would either feel less than another woman, or maybe secretly kind of like, what does she got, And that was the inner script. And it's so great getting older and discovering that that's happening, and you're like, what, and that's the inner work I'm talking about. It's so liberating. But yeah, at the time, I think a lot of these women would probably say something similar, definitely about the limited um, airplay that we would all get, or signings. Like, they could only sign, like, they already have an Alanis Morissette, they already have a this, that, a Liz Phair, whatever. Yeah.
So it's easier to form those relationships now?
It's so nourishing. That's all I really want to do. I have so many amazing new friendships that are women artists, women musicians. And honestly, I think over time, over the recent years, over my just getting older and wiser, and, also the environment that we're living in, and when the Me Too stuff happened, and then Trump and all of this negative, a lot of mistreatment. I know that's been going on for, millennia, but for me, my own personal growth, even my divorce, was me rising above the ashes of getting out from that mindset that I had to be somehow, I had to prove my value to men, whether it was a partner, whether it was my manager, whether it was the dude selling bagels. Like, I really would walk around with that, like having to be a certain way for a man. And this goes way back to my early childhood, because my dad died before I was 2. And then, I had all of these brothers who were like older, and they disappeared from my life. I was kind of an only child. And then stepdad comes in and he's like this. And so I spent my whole life trying to be something for the male perspective. Now it's like, all I really want to do is connect with women, and strong women, or even women that, might be struggling with it. It's so beautiful to help and see young women or women my age start to peel back the layers of the old paradigm. It's really amazing. I love it.
And going back to the Burdens record again, I've always heard rumors about the song Kisses and that it was about Courtney Love. What's the story there?
When I was coming up in Boston, there are all these amazing shows that the radio stations would put on. WFNX put on this, big, I don't know, holiday concert, and Hole was on the bill. I was on the bill. I can't remember if there were other shows, but I'm now just remembering all the artists for all of them. Mazzy Star. There were some dudes as well, but I can only remember the female fronted bands. But there was the Eels. I love the Eels. For some weird reason, I have no idea why, I was in a limousine with Courtney, and it was parked. It was stationary outside of the club. It was on Lansdowne Street, where all these clubs were, Avalon, Axis, and all these great clubs back then. And so I was in Courtney's limo, and I was sitting in the back with her, and she was sitting across from me. Good, they can face each other. And I was observing her. I was really just like taking it in. I was like, this is so surreal. I had loved Live Through This, their album, right? Loved it. But when I was in her presence, I was like, whoa, she is a trip. And I wondered to myself if some of it was put on. And what I noticed was that she was choosing a track, whether it was real or not, of like kind of using her pain and suffering and despair, or whatever it was, tragedy in her whole persona. And also her sexuality was, those were the two things that were really obvious to me. It was like her suffering and her sexuality. And it made for an amazing, like, she was an amazing artist and icon, right? But I kept thinking, like, I kept asking myself, do I want it that bad to behave in ways that get the news clips or the sound bites? That's what I was wondering about her. So when I went home to write Kisses, the chorus is, she kisses harder than me. I guess I'm not that hungry. That was my way of saying, like, she obviously will go to great lengths for fame. And I wonder if I'm that hungry. I just wanted to make music. Of course, I loved the recognition, but I think it was really like comparing myself to her and what she would go through just to be famous.
Hungry, I'm dirty, I'm losing my mind. Everything's fine.
And finally, we've got Tanya Donelly, another one of our earlier guests. She's one of the founders of the Throwing Muses, the Breeders, Belly. She's basically indie rock royalty. She also has a prolific solo catalog, as well as numerous collaborations with other artists. And that's the jumping off point for our conversation today. Back in the 90s, Tanya was definitely riding the wave, which soon slowed down. But it's back in full swing these days, and she's as busy as ever.
Yeah, this is like a kind of an interesting time, because there was a point not so long ago when I was sort of starting to taper off, intentionally. And then I think, I did this series of collaborations called Swan Song series with a bunch of different authors and musicians, and poets, and that ended up sort of leading to more collaborations, and it just, whether by word of mouth or just as we were doing different shows, and I just ended up sort of saying yes a lot, and also sending out a lot of invitations, which led to ongoing collaborations that continue to this day in some cases. And then also just kind of reconnecting with old friends like Brian Futter from Catherine Wheel. He and I have been doing this project called Good Day Father, which is sort of being released one song at a time. And I'm doing a collaborative project with Chris Brokaw from Codeine and Come. He and I did this medieval this EP of medieval songs that Fire Records released, which has led to a co-writing together, sort of in that same sonic vein, although I'm not singing in Latin for the ones that we're writing. And then I've got this Hungry Life solo album coming out this summer. I'm touring, doing a few shows around that in September. 4AD's re-releasing Love Songs for Underdogs next year, which I'll also be touring behind. So it's sort of to go from thinking that I might be in a quieting period, a mellowing period, just 10 years, whatever it was, to now being kind of busier than I've been since 1996. Like, it's gratifying and it's weird at the same time. But yeah, just feeling very fortunate. And then of course, Belly is going to continue to, it's a slow boat, the Belly boat, but it is still in operation. So we're in the process of slowly continuing to write together. It's really nice though, because I am not a good idle person at all. I just get lost in my own unpleasant loops. And so getting up every morning and having a list of things that I have to do, whether musical or administrative, it's really nice. It's unexpected in my dotage.
There's a fair bit of nostalgia in looking back with all these re-releases, but also a lot of looking forward with these collaborations. How do you feel about balancing those two aspects of your career?
I understand when people are allergic to nostalgia and that it might feel like moving backwards, but I don't suffer from that particular feeling. I enjoy playing old stuff very much, always. And I like the sort of relationship that it sort of reinvigorates between yourself and the people in the room who are there to see that music. I feel like that's a really important exchange I would never want to abandon. So I don't mind the nostalgia piece, as long as there's some new material woven in to keep the band feeling relevant and good and present. So I think a blend of the two. I feel like, and I think all of my bandmates would agree that just playing catalog would get a little maybe old after a while, or maybe not. Who knows? I don't know. I feel like I've made so many sweeping pronouncements over the course of my life that I try to pull back on that because I'm almost always immediately proven wrong. Something is sent my way to test the big broad brush that I just made. So I don't know. I absolutely understand when people feel exhausted by just retreading. I understand that 100%. But I feel like I can, for whatever reason, that doesn't impact me quite as acutely as it does people of my generation, sometimes.
How did you come to start recording some medieval era songs?
So Chris Brokaw, I've been a fan of his for decades. And we've known each other well enough to say hi if we ran into each other, but had never worked together and weren't particularly close, just, but I saw his name, my friend Hilken Mancini from Fuzzy, and now she's in a band with my friend Melissa Gibbs, which is off the charts amazing. I feel like Hilken and Melissa are doing some of the best work they've ever done. Like that band is fantastic. Hilken throws sort of a Christmas party every year, a holiday party, and all of the proceeds go to a different charity. So when she sent out the annual, the year before last, she sends out a big email to everyone who's ever been involved and asks who's, just to gauge interest for the upcoming event. And I saw Brokaw's name on there, and I ran into him at a Gang of Four show. And just, this is so out of character for me, but I just kind of marched up to him and said, "Hey, I saw your name on Hilken's list, and I can't get my own set together in time. So can I just crash yours?" Basically, I'll sing backups with you or guitar, like whatever. And he said, "Yeah, let me think about what we could do." And then like 2 days later, he sent me this email saying, "What if we did a medieval carol?" And he sent me a few examples. We went back and forth. We chose one, and it just really clicked for us. Just the way he plays, the way I sing it, the way, something that is nothing like anything we've ever done before, clearly, but also for some reason felt super familiar once we started doing it together. And we bring our own thing to it. It's not traditional sounding at all, but I just tapped into something that I think we both just really enjoyed doing. So we picked a few more and recorded the EP that Fire Records released in April. And we've been doing little shows here, little stretches of shows here and there. We're going over to England and Europe in November. It's been just one of the most special things I've ever done. And I actually trance out when I'm up there singing this stuff. It's brings me to a very peaceful place.
Thanks again to everybody who contributed a story to this episode, and thanks to every guest that we've had over the years. I feel very lucky that I've gotten to do this, so thank you as well for listening. I might have to release a new bonus episode here in the next few weeks, as there were so many great stories that these folks shared. And I'll end with another quick reminder that you can buy my book on 80s musicians and where they are today, 80s Redux, and its sequel, Live Through That, on 90s Artist, wherever you buy your books. And if you like this show, please leave a review where you're listening. It always helps others find us, and that will maybe get us to our next 100 episodes. And of course, subscribe so that you won't miss anything. Thanks for listening.